Our nation's capital on this glorious day. Our Mike Emanuel was down among them. Mike, it seemed to go over pretty well.
Trouble hearing you for a second. The crowd's still jacked up, but absolutely, the people behind me were literally hanging on the president's every word. There is a church-like feel here with a monster-sized congregation behind me, and the president being the equivalent of a pastor. You heard a lot of that, right?
We just simply cannot hear you. I think maybe a choke up on the mic and some technical changes on that end might help us. We'll see if we can get back to you in just a minute. Also with us now, Rich Lowry, editor of the National Review from the right, and Kirsten Powers from the left. Kirsten, was there something you wanted to hear that didn't, or something that struck you?
Well, I think part of the problem with Barack Obama is that he set such a high bar for speeches, and I think I personally wanted to hear sort of that soaring rhetoric, that inspirational type of speech that he gave at his acceptance speech when he won the nomination. He spoke there of people around the world huddled around their television sets and things like that. And I think you think of his "Yes, we can" speech, and it's pretty clear. Look, he had an objective here, and so you can only assume this is what he meant to do. And it seemed to me that it was very somber, and it was very he doesn't want to over-raise expectations to a certain extent. He's painting a picture of where we are. I think in terms of what we were just talking about what he would do about terrorists, there is this line that I thought was a little bit of the bear any burden, pay any price of JFK, where he says, we will not apologize for our way of life, nor will we waver in its defense. And for those who seek to advance their aims by inducing terror and slaughtering innocents, we say to you now that our spirit is stronger and cannot be broken. You cannot outlast us. We will defeat you. And I think that was a very strong statement to the world that, yes, we're reaching out to you, we're going to work with you, but we are also going to protect our way of life.
I underlined that passage as well. I didn't put 3 stars, but Kirsten did. I did do a double underline. And one of the reasons we won the Cold War is that there was a deep bipartisan consensus in favor of winning it. Some differences of policy and iteration and emphasis, but this was a statement of consensus. And a Democratic president said these words. George W. Bush could have said them as well. And Shep, I didn't think there were any really memorable phrases that jumped out at me. I think the closest you would come to a thesis statement or thesis sentence in this speech was actually the quote from George Washington near the end, that the city and the country, alarmed at one common danger, came forth to meet it. And that's exactly what Barack Obama was calling on the American people to do. There are very interesting elements in this speech, though. There's some conservative elements to it. Towards the end, he was talking about old virtues and old values and traditions that in America are the best way to forge progress. That's a very conservative sentiment. I also thought it was interesting right at the end when he said we're going to overcome these challenges with hope and virtue. This was a call for responsibility and a return to traditional values.
I watched George W. Bush the former president, listening to that speech, and wondered what he must be thinking at the time. The weight of the world was not lessened for this occasion. There are those who have called quite openly for the then president-elect and now president to remind us of our good and maybe not talk quite as much about how heavy things are these days. He chose to do both, I would say.
Yeah, well, I think he did outline sort of some of the issues that we face, but he also, as I think almost all presidents-elects do or presidents in their inaugural speeches, is he reiterated the goodness of the American people. He reiterated that we have to all pull together and work together. And another great line I thought was, let it be said by our children's children that when we were tested, we refused to let this journey end. We did not turn back, nor did we falter, and with eyes fixed on the horizon and God's grace upon us, we carried forth that great gift of freedom and delivered it safely to future generations. And I would think that President Bush must have enjoyed that line as well. I think that's something that he very easily could have said.
President Bush, by the way, in the East Room and heading off for departure. President Bush to head now, former President Bush to head to the Texas ranch. His father said last night he couldn't wait to get them all together, and they will in just a matter of hours. Before the parade is over, George Bush and his family will be back home in Texas.
Yeah, a word about President Bush. He's obviously entering on a low moment in his presidency. Actually, the last 2 or 3 years have kind of been a low moment. But something I think he'll get credit for as time moves on, that's kind of been lost in the partisan debate over his presidency. He's a deeply sincere man. And there's a graciousness there that's part of the Bush family bloodline. And you just look at it in this transition where it's not been about George W. Bush at all. And Barack Obama and the Obama people have been deeply appreciative of just how far out of his way the president and everyone on down has gone out of their way to cooperate and make this process smooth for them.
But if you think about how his inaugural speech was, his second inaugural speech, I'm sure you remember how sweeping it was and how he essentially almost promised to bring peace to the entire world. And I think it was sort of astonishing. And if you look at this speech from Barack Obama, it's just much more modest. I think it's a much more modest view of what we can do while saying these are our values. We want to ensure peace in the world, but it didn't go into so much detail the way that I remember President Bush doing in that second inaugural.
Keeping with the no drama Obama theme.
Yeah, I think that's right, but there is still a universalist element in Obama's speech. With Bush, it was spreading freedom. Obama talked about it more in terms of peace. Right. And there's also, Bush represented kind of the Jacksonian tradition in America, where the way you protect the United States and spread freedom, you go find the bad guys, doggone it, and you get them and you kill them and you capture them. This speech reflected a more Jeffersonian tradition, which is that the best way to spread freedom is to protect our example here at home and care for that shining city on the hill.
Which is to say that our example has not been, in his estimation, what it should and could have been.
That's right. And another thing, in this speech, there are a number of false choices that Obama outlined, and one of them is he said there shouldn't be a choice between upholding our traditional values and protecting the United States. And in a lot of ways, again, this is a non-ideological speech. Ronald Reagan, taking office in very similar circumstances with a steep recession and an unpopular incumbent leaving the White House, said in these circumstances, government is not the solution, it is the problem. Obama didn't answer, as you would expect a liberal to answer, saying government's the solution. He said, actually, we need to go from case by case and figure out whether government helps or hurts in that instance and act accordingly. So again, this reflects what Obama considers his own deep pragmatism.
President Bush and the First Lady, Laura